Chapter 12. Junho. It was an uncontrollable happiness that escaped the confines of a mind which caged the woman she would have been, and if listened to closely, the sound of that laughter had the power to lift us and at the same time drop us. Endings are beginnings in disguise. I read this in a book somewhere. Even from a distance, the vines can be seen transforming the boundaries between fields into lush green walls. And this life counters the dying throes of lemon trees, whose last offerings of fruit are as large as the earlier gifts, but the ratio of juicy flesh to thick skin has been reversed. On one of our walks, Stephen and I take a path up to the road from which the already wide vista becomes incomprehensibly vast, though it somehow extends an invitation to understand our place within the surrounding landscape. Before reaching the tarmac viewing platform, however, on the track between it and the banks of purple foxgloves lower down, we stop to catch our breaths. And just a few minutes away, we spot a large portrait of Villanova, framed by the sloping terrain on which we stand, and a tree which, with aged branches that, having succumbed to time and gravity, rest wearily on the outcrop of rock. Higher still, trees have begun to drop seed pods, which lie forming a continuous carpet of henna until the infrequent rain of summer arrives and tattoos the earth like the hands of a Hindi bride. In the animal kingdom, mosquitoes, with their even nastier relative Melgush, begin their dusk reign and demonstrate that one man's loss is another man's gain. Stephen's blood is more appetising to the biting insects than mine, so while he takes the flak from the tiny assailants, I stay ready to apply antihistamine to the parts he cannot reach. Festa. In early June, the country awoke to a new government, but to the backdrop of economic wrangling, life went on, and our Sunday afternoons at the association playing the digestive biscuit game, Fitu, became a routine. Little by little, we understood the rules, though something as important as which members were on our own team eluded us for more than a few weeks. Our friendship with Manuel T grew, and 3 or 4 times a week we could be found, as the afternoons turned into evenings, passing time in his adega, the area beneath his house where he stored his barrels of wine. Other neighbours, friends and family of Manuel T dropped by to engage in conversation and have a glass of wine, and Stephen and I began placing people in locations and relationships, adding detail to the picture of our neighbourhood. At home, we often discussed our neighbours, and they too must have assessed our place in their village by talking about us, because a frequently asked question about when we would return to England gradually stopped, and as our ability to communicate grew, along with our desire to be part of our community, the extent of our relocation to Portugal became known. The warmer weather signalled a continuous period of village festas, which gradually commemorated a particular saint, or which generally commemorated a particular saint. And these parties often began on a Friday and continued until the Monday. In the Portugal I was beginning to know, the closed-circuit television cameras, which were a common sight for me in Britain's streets, were absent, and in their place, on top of tall poles, were speaker cones which broadcast happy festa music, tunes which had a fast beat that seemed impossible to dance to, but that the Portuguese nevertheless managed adeptly. Unlike the Big Brother scenario evoked by 24-hour surveillance CCTV, the cones appeared anything but sinister as their tinny sound drifted to our veranda, but they did nonetheless remind me of a public address system a totalitarian regime might use to disseminate propaganda. When our village festa arrived, it was St. Antonio who was our honoured guest. And entering into the spirit of things, Stephen and I walked down to the association building about 8 o'clock on a Friday evening, and were disappointed to find only 3 other people there, 2 of them running the bar. As in Porto the previous month, we witnessed the different sociable hours warmer countries than the UK bring about. Instead of nightfall ending the day, the darkness brought with it relief from the afternoon and evening heat, and people left their houses instead of withdrawing into them. By 10 o'clock, only a half dozen more people had arrived, and none of these were people we knew, so we decided to finish our drinks and go home. As our glasses emptied, cars began to arrive, but we had readied ourselves to leave, and the festivities proceeded without us. The following day, when we spoke to Manel T, he asked us where we had been the previous night. After we had explained what had happened, he told us that Sunday was an early occasion and a good day for the whole community as things focused around a sardine barbecue. Our friends advised for us to arrive at the association around 7 o'clock, but we believed an hour later would be better because we did not wish to repeat the previous Friday night's experience and be ready for home by the time others turned up. To our surprise, when Sunday came and we arrived at the event, the area between the Chapel of Santo Antonio and the association building was occupied by quite a few people, and the smell of grilled fish, along with the smell of grilled fish. Manel T was standing with 4 or 5 men, some of whom we recognised and some of whom we had not seen before. But we went over and greeted the group and received a boa back from before being told to get something to eat. One evening during the previous week, a few neighbours had been around the village, one playing a concertina, and they had asked for donations. Stephen and I were unsure of the details, but gave a donation towards what we had considered must benefit the community in some way, and it became clear now that we had contributed towards our barbecue, because no money exchanged hands as the fish, bread and wine were consumed. Of the neighbours we knew, there were only a few missing on that Sunday evening. The Major was one of them, although Maria was there with their daughter Lourdes, who introduced us to her 2 sons, one who lived in France and was visiting with his wife and new baby. Steve and I were surprised to see that even the retired English couple who lived very close to the area had attended, because although niceties were exchanged on the rare occasions we were face to face with them, we got the impression that they kept very much with the expat community for socialising. This was the first time we had been given a real opportunity to speak to them, and with sardines enveloped in the thick maize bread called brua, we conversed a little before I used the excuse of picking another sardine from the barbecue for my retreat. The 2 people I had walked away from seemed very nice, and they had offered us some of the picnic they had brought with them, freely admitting that the heads and tails approach to eating fish was not for them, and I had to admit that I put up with looking like an outsider to decapitate and gut mine, but I felt that to stay and talk with other English people would be rude, and I would have been disappointed in myself if I had ignored Portuguese friends. As it became obvious that I was not going to return to the conversation, Stephen too made his excuses and left, upon which we spoke to Maria and a few other neighbours who sat with her. We finally introduced ourselves to the Russian doll who had directed us when we were looking to buy firewood. Her name was Natalia, and she happened to be the mother of not Ruth's sister. Just before it got dark, a raffle was drawn, and amongst the prizes was a sheep. Following the draw, there was a dance, and the atmosphere turned into that resembling a family wedding, at which many age groups attended, and a son without a girlfriend might just as likely dance with his mum or aunt. The beat of the music remained fast, but young and old somehow managed to waltz at 5 times the traditional pace. Stephen and I walked back home with Manuel tea, and as we had done many times on a Sunday, but we declined the offer of a copo de vino as a nightcap, and parted on the customary demania, even if tomorrow was not going to be the day that we next saw each other. Montemorro. Mary was looking after our place, so on the fourth day of the month, when Stephen and I awoke, I strolled to the window and, drawing back the curtains, was met by clear blue sky over a near deserted beach. We were marking a year of marriage, and the previous night we had booked into the hotel in Figueira de Foz, at which we had stayed on our previous September's late honeymoon. Before checking out of the hotel, we strolled along the pavement above the beach for a very brief time before the lure of the sand and the Atlantic became irresistible, and where, regardless of whether 200 people, or nobody witnessed their actions, the waves carried away and deposited driftwood and plastic bottles in their restlessness. We had opted not to pay for breakfast at the hotel, preferring to have coffee, fruit juice, toast and a cake at the cafe with the irresistible sweet treats. And while we were there, we looked at a small tourist booklet we had picked up at the Miranda de Cordoba Expo, and we read about a castle which was not far away from where we were. In fact, it would only be a short detour from our direction home. For us, the beauty of Montemorro was its simplicity and space. There was little visual grandeur, but our imaginations were given freedom as we scrambled up onto walls and ran hands along old battlements. On my part, I felt as I did when I was a boy and woke on December the 25th mornings, knowing without doubt that Father Christmas existed and the world was a truly magical place. For Stephen's part, his face showed a lightness of heart, fitting to mark our first anniversary. A beautiful life. Around the middle of the month, there was a long weekend spent in the UK to attend a friend's wedding. And on the return, it was the first time we were flying not only to Portugal, but going home. And with us was my sister Linda. Linda is my eldest sister, and she had meningitis when she was 5 years old. This left her with a mental handicap, which is difficult to understand and even more difficult to explain. When I was a child and used to become frustrated with my sister's behaviour, my dad used to say, if she had a leg or an arm missing, you'd see the problems she faces and help. And it is true that people with mental disability often do not get the same sympathy as those with a physical handicap. Despite the anxieties of my other sister, brother and me about the flight, Linda showed little worry about the journey and great enjoyment throughout the whole of it. During Lynn's stay, tensions often ran high, partly because I expected gratitude for inviting her to Portugal with us, partly because I failed to appreciate the circumstances that trapped us with Lynn applied in reverse, and also because I did not understand her disability. Our home is not isolated, but it requires either a car or familiarity with the area to do so simple a task as to buy a newspaper, not to mention some level of competency of the Portuguese language. And even after 7 months of living here, there remained many times that Stephen and I felt trapped by the tongue that would not form the sounds we wished it to. After Lynn had returned to England and we were alone once more, we realised that she had never complained about any of the above. And moreover, while inwardly berating her for lack of appreciation for what we did for her, we had not fully appreciated that our two-way partnership had become a cooperative of 3. While Lynn was with us, the morning routine of making a morning cuppa, feeding the cats and letting the ducks out of their pen was adopted by her too, and she eagerly drew up a 3-day rota, which was stuck onto the fridge door. Other tasks besides the morning ones no longer fell only to us. Washing was loaded and unloaded from the machine, pegged on the line and taken in and folded, while I read or Stephen arranged music. And though we continued to prepare the majority of the meals, Lynn helped when she was asked. From the first visits our family and friends paid us, our neighbours welcomed them. I mentioned to Stephen once that perhaps the Portuguese we spoke to were pleasantly surprised by the family bonds that still exist within the UK, despite the perception the media gave of a more insular, broken society. Within a few days, Lynn joined us in Maniltese Adega, where we sat on the back seat of an old car, the sprung cushion now resting on a wooden framework instead of in its original body. On later occasions, we drank wine and ate cheese and prosciutto with the Major Maria, and socialised with more neighbours while sampling more homemade wine. The laughter that escaped Linda on occasions when we had all drunk more than government guidelines would suggest was healthy had a quality that few adults display. It was an uncontrollable happiness that escaped the confines of a mind which caged the woman she would have been. And if listened to closely, the sound of that laughter had the power to lift us and at the same time drop us. Within Linda, I saw traits of the woman who is controlled, magnetic, and inventive, someone who is caring, compassionate, and selfless. And along with those traits, which I see in my brother and my other sister, I began to know a person who wanted to be as independent and was as contradictory as me.